Hello and welcome back to Leaving Nothing Undared, a podcast from Oblate School of Theology's Department of Continuing Education. I'm your host, Antonio Fritzi, and I'm delighted to not only welcome you back, but to welcome an incredible guest today, Father Daniel Renaud, a member of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. Now, Father Daniel has an extensive professional experience in spiritual direction, working in psychology and drama. He'll be facilitating our upcoming series on 3 unlikely mystics. Today, he's going to guide us through the wisdom of each of these mystics, how they relate to each other, and what we might expect from registering for his program. Let's dive in. All right, so Father Daniel, welcome. Thank you for joining us. As we begin this session, one of the first things I'd really love to hear about is your background, in part because it's quite diverse. You know, you've been involved in things like drama and theater education, psychology. You've been a spiritual director. Of course, you're trained in Catholic theology, as well as a number of areas. So if you could share a bit about your background and particularly how those experiences in different areas shaped the work that you're doing today.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Antonio. And I can tell you that my background in theater and my experience of Catholic education certainly had a lot to do with where I am now. Psychology has always been a fascination of mine. Of course, developmental psychology was my major focus because when I was teaching, I wanted to know where my learners were at. And but the drama part was certainly responding to a creative aspect of myself that I wasn't sure was going to translate when I became a Catholic priest. But as a missionary, I think there's room for more peripheral experiences that may be a more traditional form of ministry, for instance, in a parish, which I have done. But because I'm religious and a missionary, I think it's easier to incorporate my psychology, my psychodrama, and my theater into kind of like one creative spiritual thrust.
Wow, that's beautiful. You know, it's not often that, especially we lay people, get to hear these kinds of movements arise in a person and kind of wed together into their vocation and ministry. So that's an incredible experience that you've had. And I would note, you know, we've pointed out that it's diverse and different, and these things kind of almost mystically come together. And that kind of turns our attention to the 3 unlikely mystics that you'll be talking about in this program, right? Catherine of Siena, Carl Jung, and Etty Hillesum. Can you share a bit about what inspired you to bring together these kind of 3 different figures that one might not immediately associate with one another?
Right. I wanted it to be accessible to people for today. So that's why I only chose one medieval figure, such as Catherine, because I found her very inspiring. Her intensity of intimacy with Jesus Christ, I thought, was just outstanding, very physical, but also she had to surmount certain things. She was literate. Carl Jung has always been one of my favorites because of his ability to dive into the unconscious part, which many of us resist because it has to do with the shadow part of who we are, things that we might not like, and in fact might even hate about ourselves, like certain impulses and instincts we have that need to be transformed. And he certainly was able to do that, especially his feminine side, because he was staggeringly intelligent, and yet he was also very intuitive. And so I have liked that about him. And finally, with Etty, I would say, quote unquote, she would be my favorite. The reason I put the 3 of them together is I wanted good representation, at least 2 women, you know, 1 man. But I also wanted people that had like an artistic kind of flavor to them, because that's where I come from. And so for Etty, it's particularly her artistic sensitivity that appealed to me, and her ability to surrender to prayer. That was really a great discovery, because she did it during the time of the Nazi occupation as a Jew in Holland. And therefore, it was a greater, you might say, challenge for her not to live within the wave of hate that was surrounding her. Jewish people were hating the Nazis, and she did not want to participate in that. And it's her spiritual growth that helped her not to do that.
Wow. It's important, I think, to point out that each of these individuals is this great wealth of wisdom that we can turn to, and at the same time, encountering them bears its challenges for us, right? These kind of growing challenges. I appreciate that Catherine of Siena has a kind of passionate intimacy with God that might strike us as unfamiliar if we haven't shared that, right? Jung is confronting areas of himself, and we might not be eager to go to the same places, right? And we might even find ourselves in situations like Etty Hillesum, in which we find ourselves in a culture that's perhaps not leading us to this deeper intimacy and love with God that we would seek, right? So I think it's a testament to the rich wealth of mysticism and the mystic traditions. I want to dwell a little bit on Catherine of Siena, who is probably, as you noted, one of the better known medieval mystics, certainly among women mystics. But
Yes.
I've heard you point out that one of the challenges she faced was with asceticism. How does
Yes.
her journey inform your understanding of asceticism and mysticism today?
I would say that we have to do with Catherine what we have to do with Etty and Carl Jung. We have to put them in their historical context. And so you need to remember that it did not have that much agency during medieval ages. And so the ability to be aesthetically theatrical was a way of saying, I've got a spiritual authority that maybe because I'm not ordained, educated. Remember, Catherine was illiterate and might have been able to read, but certainly probably not write in her 30s. And so everything was written from dictation. And she had to deal with a great amount of, you might say, how do I find the authority to speak to the people I'm speaking to? She wrote to princes, to popes, to bishops, to priests, and to lay people, of course. And it's her asceticism that became kind of like her badge of authority. So we need to put that in perspective. And it was very extreme. And she did speak about her inability to take food as a disease that God had given her that she had to live with. Now, today we would have a psychological category to interpret that. Some people have called it holy anorexia, but I think even using the word is kind of dangerous. But she's certainly very pertinent because then we wonder about how is our experience a form of authority? How is my spiritual experience a form of authority? Even if, quote unquote, I might not identify myself as a person of authority in religious or spiritual circles.
Wow. And that, what I'm hearing from you is that gift that we receive from God that provides that kind of individual and unique source of authority, insight, relationship, a psychological understanding can supplement this kind of greater depth and recognition of that gift in us. And I know, you're experienced in psychology, Carl Jung, huge impact on that field. So if you could speak a little bit more to his work, and then in particular, how it supplements maybe a more traditional understanding of spirituality, or really
Yeah.
welds that psychology and spirituality together.
Yes, that's an excellent way of putting it, Antonio, because I know that even saying that Carl Jung is a mystic, some people will disagree with that. In the scholarly world, it's certainly a great point of contention. There are pros and there are cons. And of course, I am connected to the pros. Now, one of the major reasons I think is because he was so courageous in being able to separate himself from the religion of his father. His father was a very dry kind of minister who actually felt like he had lost faith and was not really connected to a vibrant relationship with God. And that was very disappointing to Carl Jung as a child. And so as he grew, he turned to psychology and the sciences. And what's really interesting is you might say that his religious seeking, or his antenna for being a seeker, started to go within. And so he got fascinated with the inner journey as a psychiatrist, but he developed things that are very unique. The idea of archetypes, the idea of looking at our dreams as potential messengers that have things to tell us about how we can grow, and especially the harder parts of us. I had a dream recently of someone being violent in a dream, and I thought to myself, I wonder if there's that part inside of me. So I had to contend with that violence inside of myself, which some might call the shadow side. Because certainly as a priest, I work a lot on being compassionate and gentle. And so the violence becomes something that kind of like hides underneath and couches itself in the unconscious. So looking at unconscious motivations, energies, the positive and the negative ones, can really inform us in a more accurate way, the way it did for Carl, and how we operate, how God is speaking to us, but also what is specific to me and unique to me that I really have to offer in my relationship with God from my own personality, because he was fascinated by the human personality. And of course, let's be honest, with his own, because he just wondered, how do I operate? How do I function? And dreams were really helpful for him to do that.
And my understanding is that that kind of self-reflection and questioning, who am I? Why am I the way that I am? In many ways, who has God created in me, right? What are the parts of myself that I may not have acknowledged, or I've been pretty intentional about ignoring, right? This is much of the work that Carl Jung guides us through, and a big part of the experience of spirituality and mysticism.
Absolutely. And so the ability for self-knowledge, the ability for self-reflection. And of course, I contend that we need to see Carl within his own. I mean, he separated from Freud. He was a psychiatrist and a scientist. And he had people he could be with to discuss this, but he did it mostly on his own. I think today, one of the difficulty for us is, how do I find a partner that will help me to do that? And not necessarily a therapist, but someone who will really listen, and where I can listen to what's going on very deep inside of me.
And that kind of listening to our own stories, right, is that path forward in deepening our relationship with God. You mentioned that you had a particular love for Etty Hillesum, right? And you've spoken a bit about her experience and her story. Can you share a bit more about what in her story you find so compelling or attracts you to her as this kind of, if you had to choose favorite among the three?
Right. And I don't want to choose a favorite,
Right.
but that probably she's historically a little closer, which she also died fairly young and dramatically and tragically. And I guess in a certain way, I have an attraction to that, this idea that you can grow to the maximum and the optimum of your own capacity for listening to God at your own stage of your life. So I found her fascinating, because you don't need to be 60 or 70 to be a person that's spiritual. She was as spiritual as she could be in her own time, in her own age. But of course, what was around her helped her to kind of like live spirituality on steroids, so to speak. And, it's not the best way to describe it, but it's certainly, the environment she was in. And then she had somebody to help her. I spoke about Carl Jung doing it by himself, but she had a guide, and he was very important. He actually was trained by Carl Jung, Julian Speer, and she did a lot of sessions with him, and he helped her to dig and into the gospel, into writings that would inspire her. But the thing that inspired me most about her is her artistic sensitivity. When you read her, you feel like you're reading a poet. She has the ability to translate and articulate an inner beauty when things around her were very ugly. And that fascinates me, that people can find inside of themselves the way God is speaking to them without being overly affected by what is outside. And I think that's a challenge for all of us, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that in each of these and throughout this conversation, that kind of subject of guidance and doing this work together and with someone has come up, and I think this is an excellent opportunity for us to acknowledge that these people, while they might not be living in the sense that we live or understand living to be, right, but are still present and available to us to be guides for us on our own journey.
They are. And as Christians, we believe that spiritual connection is as real as one-on-one connection. Although we, as people who believe in the incarnation, we favor the real contact one-on-one. But the writings of these people and the reflection of people who have really dug into them really highlights that they have a very clear spiritual message for each of us. And I don't hesitate to call all three mystics, in the sense that they dared to be courageous enough to dive into mystery with the challenges that entailed, and it was different for each one of them.
That's incredible. I want to ask, I almost want to say a funner question or more fun question, but I think it's really a sweet question. And that is, if you were to be able to have a meal with these mystics, I was going to ask, which would you pick? I think I might have an idea there, but is there a question you would want to ask them if you had all three at the table?
I would say that if I had all three at the table, I would be listening a lot more to what they would be saying to each other. Because as the series will propose, it's by listening to their own stories and their own insights that I would grow. So I'm not sure I would ask a question. If I did, I might ask all of them, what do you see that you have in common with each other? And to me, that would be a very interesting conversation to listen to. It's like, how would Carl answer that? How would Etty answer that? And I think they would have a lot of mutual admiration for each other. But through that mutual admiration, I think each one of them would be also very unique in the way they would answer it. And I would be all ears. I think I would stop eating.
Absolutely. And this course, this program is an opportunity really to do that, right? To do that very thing. And it sounds like a wonderful opportunity. I know that you, as a human being, as someone who's dedicated themselves to walking along with people through this experience, right, in different forms of ministry, I know that you care about what participants and registrants experience in this program. So is there something you particularly hope that they would take away from participating in this?
Yes. The thing I would want is, and it will sound a little too divine maybe, but if we speak in artistic terms, I would hope that they all see their soul as a musical instrument, and that when they hear of the instrument of Carl and Etty's instrument of their own soul, that their soul would respond to it, and that they would not be afraid to play their own instrument, to be their own soul artist in terms of their deep relationship to God, and that they believe that music is being listened to by God in delight.
A powerful image. Thank you, Father Daniel. I appreciate you sitting down with us today. Thank you for agreeing to offer this series on unlikely mystics. I just feel overwhelmed with gratitude for this, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Thanks for the opportunity to serve. I can't wait to offer this series. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. I want to thank you for tuning in, and of course, Father Daniel for agreeing to speak with us today, as well as facilitate this upcoming program on these three unlikely mystics. This program will take place January 11th, 18th, and 25th. These are Saturdays. It'll start at 9 and at 11 a.m., and it'll be on campus here at Oblate School of Theology. I'd strongly encourage you to consider registering as soon as you can. The registration fee is $90. If you'd like more information, please visit our webpage at www.ost.edu. Now, again, thanks for tuning in to Leaving Nothing Undared, this podcast from Oblate School of Theology's Department of Continuing Education. I sincerely pray that you continue to leave nothing undared for the gospel. God bless you.